sponsor Deloitte. And before I turn it over to Stuart Cottrell of Deloitte, let me just say how very grateful we are and proud of Deloitte for sticking with us when it would have been easy and totally understandable to walk away from this event, given the enormous impact that COVID has had on all of us. Thank you, Deloitte, for your ongoing commitment and for your unflagging support of this event. And now to introduce you to the mayor and tell you about a special offer from Deloitte, welcome the partner from Deloitte, Stuart Cottrell. Stuart.
Good morning. My name is Stuart Cottrell, and I'm a partner at Deloitte and a member of the Chamber's Board of Directors. Deloitte is proud to be associated with the London Chamber of Commerce State of the City Address, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to today's event. The team, including Dale Zordreger, Rob DeCesare, myself, and all our partners and staff, are proud of our strong history and deep connections with the Chamber, and are thrilled to continue as a sponsor of the State of the City Address. On Friday, you may have heard an announcement that M&P, a Calgary-based accounting firm, acquired the small business subset of Deloitte's private business segment in Canada. We're currently communicating details to our clients and will continue to share updates as they become available. However, we want to assure you we will continue to play an important role in London. This arrangement will help us to sharpen our focus on helping our private mid-market clients move from the tens of millions to hundreds of millions in revenue. But today, we're excited to share news of another kind, that of an upcoming event, exclusively for attendees of today's State of the City Address. Following today's event, stay tuned for an invitation from the London Chamber of Commerce to a webinar hosted by our Honourable Pierre Pettigrew, Executive Advisor International at Deloitte Canada. The webcast will take place on March 9th at 11 a.m. Pierre will provide his perspectives on the new U.S. administration and its potential impact on Canada. We hope you will join us for this event. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mayor Ed Holder. Mayor Ed Holder was sworn in as London's 64th mayor in 2018. Prior to being elected to City Council, Ed served as a Member of Parliament for London West from 2008 to 2015, 2 years of which he spent as our Federal Minister of Science and Technology. Ed does not sit idle. He's currently sitting on as a member of the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee, the London Police Services Board, the London Economic Development Corporation Board, the London Convention Centre Board, and the University Western Board of Governors. Prior to entering politics, he worked many years in the insurance industry and was the founder of Ontario West Insurance in 1981, which later merged in 1991 with Stevenson & Hunt Brokers. Remaining in the insurance industry, he ultimately served as president of Stevenson & Hunt until 2008, and during that time, the company experienced record growth and the number of employees grew fourfold. Other notable business achievements include being founder of the Directors Club of London, serving as the president of the London Club, chair of the London Convention Centre, and as Gerry likes to remind everyone, his greatest accomplishment was being the past president of the London Chamber of Commerce. If you've ever met Mayor Ed Holder, you know that community service and civic participation are extremely important to him. He has held leadership positions in more than 40 community and non-for-profit organizations. Of note, he was co-chair of the Rock and New Year's Eve event in London, co-founder of the Business Cares Food Drive, and past chair and patron of St. John's Ambulance. His volunteerism has been recognized with more than 24 awards, including the Canada 125 Medal, the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal, and the Sovereign's Medal for Volunteerism. Ed is proud to call London his home for close to 4 decades, and throughout this time in this city, his focus has been twofold: on successfully building his business and giving back to his community. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mayor Ed Holder.
Well, thanks very much, Stuart. I appreciate those very kind comments. I'm reminded once when I had the opportunity to speak at a specific event in London, and there was an introducer, and when we asked for comments later, the one of the comments was that I find it interesting and how that the introduction was much better than the speaker's presentation. Let's hope that's not the case today. But good morning, all, and my thanks as well to the Chamber of Commerce for hosting this morning's event as it has for the last 42 years. This remains the largest gathering of its kind in all of Canada, virtual or otherwise, and the credit for this and building it into the annual tradition it has become belongs to my friend Gerry Macartney. As we know, after 24 years as CEO of the London Chamber, Gerry is set to retire from his role by month's end, meaning this is the final State of the City organized under his leadership. Gerry's never shied away from a challenge, and he's entirely fearless when tackling difficult issues. It seems fitting, then, that pulling a State of the City under these circumstances through a pandemic would be one of his last official acts as Chamber CEO. Gerry, I've met few people with your clarity of thought, vision, and commitment to service. You are an icon in London's business community, and we honor your leadership. When speaking of leadership, I would also like to recognize and highlight the efforts of our city manager, Lynn Livingston. She officially took over the position on March 1st of last year. Less than 3 weeks later, our entire province was under lockdown. To say her introduction to the role was baptism by fire would be an extreme understatement. To say she's been anything less than phenomenal would be an even greater mischaracterization. Lynn's decisive, collaborative, and compassionate approach to leadership has guided our city through a time like no other. We salute you, Lynn, as well as our entire senior leadership team and our amazing City of London staff. Our municipal unions and their leadership have stood tall in support of Londoners. I can share with you that City Council regularly references the caliber of the work done by our staff, and I wholeheartedly agree. Similarly, I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues on Council. They represent 14 different wards across our great city, coming from diverse backgrounds, experiences, and demographics. But when it matters most, when the stakes have been highest, this council has rallied around our community. During those times, council has been at its best, considering the interests of London as a whole and never wavering in its commitment to the greater good. To our federal and provincial leaders with us today, I say thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for responding to our city's needs. And thank you for taking action. When we have needed our senior levels of government most, they have answered the call, and I'm sure we will be calling again. At last year's State of the City address, I concluded my remarks by declaring without hesitation that the state of our city was strong. And what feels like a lifetime later, I believe that's still to be true. But the state of our city, at this moment in time, is also tired. The state of our city is equally anxious, frustrated, and weary, all for good reason. I cannot and will not use this platform to sugarcoat our circumstances. Instead, what I've set out to do, as I've done in previous years, and especially during this time, is to provide brutal honesty, along with credible hope. While COVID-19 hit with full force in March of last year, it actually arrived on our doorstep in London several weeks later. You'll remember a young woman returning to our city from Wuhan, China, became one of the first confirmed cases in all of Canada. That was back on January 31st. Seems like a lifetime ago. To her credit, she immediately self-isolated, took all appropriate precautions, and prevented her illness from spreading to others. Even still, the devastating impact of COVID-19 has been our reality ever since. More than 12 months, 382 days, and still counting. During this time, we've desperately missed our loved ones, our family, our friends. We have sacrificed the potential for countless memories and experiences that could have been, if not for the virus. We've seen our kids unable to enjoy their favorite activities. We've seen family breakdowns and mental health deterioration. Businesses have gone under, while men and women across our city are now unemployed. What's more, and what's exasperating, is that every time we've been through this, and after 382 days at this moment, it feels at times as though we're spinning our wheels. As of today, while our most recent lockdown has eased, the risk posed by COVID variants and the potential for a third wave exists. The delivery of vaccines from international suppliers has been plagued by seemingly constant delay. We don't know when reliable supply chains will be established. In the meantime, more people continue to get sick. More people continue to die. What's perhaps most heartbreaking is we know with certainty people who are healthy and alive at this very moment will become infected and will have died before this is over. As of today, since the start of the pandemic, 181 people from the London area have died as a result of the virus. And I'd like to pause briefly for a moment of silence. Would ask you to join me in honor of those lives lost. That, my friends, is the stark reality, the brutal honesty of our current situation. But remember, I also mentioned credible hope. Not just hope on its own, but credible hope. The kind that sustains us in our darkest times. A hero of mine, Sir Winston Churchill, once famously said, "If you're going through hell, keep going." And that's exactly what we're doing and will continue to do together. That's the London I know, the London you know, and the London we all love. The fact is, there is hope, credible hope, more so than at any other time since the onset of the pandemic. It's not lost on me that this morning, thousands of our businesses across our London area will reopen for the first time since the December 26th lockdown. Just over a month ago, our daily COVID case counts were approaching 200. We're now in the low teens, and down to 8 just yesterday. This hope comes in many forms, however. It comes first and foremost from our healthcare heroes, our essential workers, our London police, London firefighters, and paramedic services. Those who keep showing up day after day, working extremely long hours, missing family members, and making significant sacrifices, all while under immense stress and scrutiny. You are not only frontline workers and essential workers and first responders. You remain our last line of defense. You've held the line against all odds, and that for our entire city offers you its deepest gratitude and will remain forever in your debt. We draw credible hope from the latest offerings produced by the collaboration of medical research and science, safe and effective vaccines being administered on a daily basis across our region. London was one of the first communities to vaccinate all residents of long-term care and high-risk retirement homes. Like all cities across Canada, we await an adequate supply of vaccine. However, our public health unit has used this time to develop an infrastructure to administer as many shots as quickly as possible by securing the necessary staff and physical space to do so. We will be capable of delivering 3,000 shots per day, 7 days a week. Prime Minister Trudeau, Premier Ford, deliver us the vaccine, and London will finish the job. As much as anything, we draw credible hope from the incredible sense of community that has always been at the core of who we are as Londoners. We see it every day in ways that go too often unnoticed or underappreciated. We see it as well during times of crisis and times of overwhelming sadness. We saw it the August before last on Woodman Avenue in Old East Village. And we saw it just a few weeks before Christmas on Teeple Terrace in Westmount. We see it still in shows of solemn solidarity as Londoners hang construction vests from doors, balconies, and windows to to honor the lives of Henry Harder and John Martins. That same sense of community, that sense of empathy and sense of compassion has guided our response to COVID-19. Within 48 hours of the Ontario government declaring a state of emergency in March 2020, representatives from more than 200 local businesses, groups, agencies, and organizations joined together as part of the Mayor's Economic Impact and Recovery Task Force, as well as the Mayor's Social Impact and Recovery Task Force. We did this because, in addition to the economic impacts, we recognized right away the strain this pandemic would inevitably place on London's most vulnerable and the stresses on those who provide them support. Yet nobody involved in this effort asked, "What's in it for me?" or "How much of my time will you need?" Instead, the most common question was, "How can we help?" Over the course of 4 months, meeting multiple times each week, these groups worked closely with many members of City Council, who co-led the specific groups with community leaders, with civic administration, as well as local MPs and MPPs. Our deputy leader at the time, Jesse Helmer, chaired the initial meetings and is owed great recognition for those efforts. These task forces were crucial, especially in the early days of the pandemic, as we heard firsthand and in real time from key stakeholders the effects of COVID-19 across all sectors, so we could best determine how to mitigate the initial impacts and work towards a safe and rapid recovery. As a result of these efforts, dozens of initiatives weren't only conceived, they were acted upon. The United Way of Elgin Middlesex, in conjunction with the London Community Foundation, in less than 1 year, deployed over $3.7 million in COVID relief funding to agencies across our region, providing rapid relief to vulnerable individuals. We successfully lobbied the federal and provincial government for a moratorium on evictions, a rent freeze for residential tenants, all through 2021, and millions of dollars of support to women and children experiencing domestic abuse. And locally, we provided property tax deferrals. Locally, new partnerships were formed, including ones that see the London Food Banking working with RBC Place, 519 Pursuit, and Youth Opportunities Unlimited to produce and distribute bagged lunches every day to those who are homeless or at risk. The City of London, collaborating with emergency shelters, managed to move nearly 200 individuals into motel rooms instead of crowded, congregate settings, and London's numerous faith-based communities were connected to support service agencies, and to them we are very grateful. The task force has since evolved into the London Community Recovery Network, and we continue to witness its many positive impacts, most recently with a $2.3 million emergency response to winter homelessness. This includes 2 temporary overnight shelters and 2 daytime coffee houses acting as drop-in centers. More action will stem from the London Community Recovery Network in the coming weeks and months. These are but a few examples of credible hope, and there are so many more to be found within our local economy. One of our signature achievements in working with Council, something that Deputy Mayor Josh Morgan, Councillor Helmer, City staff, and I worked specifically on, was successfully convincing the provincial government to streamline its education tax rate for all businesses in Ontario. Did you know that for almost a decade, London businesses in many communities across Ontario had been paying a much higher rate than some very specific cities in Ontario? It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. No longer will that be the case. The province heard us. Minister Jeff York and Minister Monty McNaughton helped take our message to Queen's Park. And the result? Commercial taxpayers in London will save $22 million alone this year, and hundreds of millions of dollars for business across the province. And not just this year, but each and every year going forward. That's a massive competitive boost to the already impressive turnaround for our local economy. According to Stats Canada, the London area has now seen 7 straight months of positive employment growth, adding an amazing 33,300 jobs during that time. It shouldn't come as a surprise that London's economy has recorded the most rapid and robust recovery in all of Ontario, regaining more jobs at a faster pace than Ottawa, Toronto, KW, Guelph, Hamilton, or Windsor. In fact, London is only one of 3 communities across Ontario to have more people employed today than we did at the start of the lockdown in March of last year. Not only that, but the 2021 Ontario Economic Report from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce found London businesses at 70% have the highest percentage of confidence in our community's ability to thrive coming out of the pandemic. No other region of the province even comes close. These statistics are a testament to the dedication and ingenuity of our local employers and the work ethic of everyday Londoners. We are resilient. We will not roll over. We are London strong. Yet despite the encouraging employment numbers, we know they fail to capture the experience of many Londoners who are still laid off or working reduced hours due to these current restrictions. As someone with a family running a small business, I empathize deeply with all of you who continue to be impacted. Businesses have done everything that's been asked of them, often on very short notice and at significant expense, while constantly adapting to ensure members of the public are kept safe from the COVID-19. According to the available data, businesses are not responsible for the level of spread we've experienced, but they and their staffs wind up bearing the brunt of the consequences. In spite of the pandemic, we set a new record last year for building permits, over $1.6 billion, breaking our previous all-time high from 2014. We've seen 26 businesses leave the downtown since last year. We've also welcomed 26 new businesses to the core during the same period, including Siskin's law firm. Let's show everyone that London is open for business. We need London to be at its very best. Over and over again, we see world-class employers choose our city. During the pandemic, Aspire Food Group, Anvil Laboratories, Quest Brands, Carfax Canada, Boss Innovations, Control BioCloud, and most recently the Hard Rock Cafe all announced plans to invest long-term or to expand in London. Announcements that will create thousands of jobs, and there are more. And just a few weeks ago, the Grove at Western Fair District received a multi-million-dollar investment from FedDev Ontario, which will assist the creation of 550 new skilled jobs. Thank you, MP Kate Young, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Economic Development. Your support of this project, amongst several which have been approved, truly matters to London. Meanwhile, construction continues at the new Maple Leaf Food Facility on Wilton Grove Road, and when completed next year, will bring another 1,500 new jobs to London. I say bravo, and thank you to all businesses and industry who call London home. Together, our economy has weathered the worst of COVID, and we are well positioned for the balance of 2021 and beyond. Restoring London's place as an economic driver in Ontario has been a priority of mine since before I was elected as mayor, and so it remains. We've demonstrated an ability to put aside self-interest in favor of greater collective interest. If ever there was a community that gives true meaning to the phrase, "We're all in this together," it is ours. However, as the pandemic wears on, that same spirit, those newfound partnerships will be called upon once again to help positively assist all sectors and all individuals through the final mile. We've done it once, we'll do it again, because we are ready. You know, friends, hope, credible hope, breeds hard-earned optimism, which when paired, begets a fundamental truth of its own, and that is this: COVID too shall pass. That's no longer a hope, that's a fact. There's more of this behind us than lays before us. We could not have said that with confidence a few months ago, but we can now. Uncertainty has been lifted. Thanks to vaccines, combined with ongoing advancements in treatments and rapid testing, we know how this ends, and we know approximately when. More than anything else, we know with certainty that this has an end. Likely not with a moment of triumph we'll all remember, rather with a slow whimper, albeit one we won't soon forget. While we remain focused in the present, and for good reason, on flattening the curve in a post-COVID London, there are other curves that must also be flattened. I think first and foremost of poverty, lack of affordable housing, and a lack of supports for London's most vulnerable. These curves continue to rise, but they must be crushed with the same determination, the same level of community involvement, and the same commitment as we have summoned against COVID. For all our talk from us wanting to get back to normal or getting back to the way things were, how does that apply to those in our community who slept rough before the pandemic and continue doing the same through it? What are they getting back to? What about the 1 in 7 families who struggle to put food on the table? Or the 1 in 5 who live at or below the poverty line? For too many in our city, there's no discernible difference from the way things are to the way things used to be. There's little in the way of hope, and even less in the way of choice. It must be said and it must be understood. London's most vulnerable didn't choose their circumstances. They didn't choose to be physically or sexually assaulted as children or choose to be born with complex mental illnesses. They didn't choose to be exposed to trauma and subsequent PSD. They are where they are largely due to a lack of choices. However, we are in the unique position to support our most vulnerable by making different choices, more compassionate and caring choices. And that's what I'm proposing here today. Over the last 12 months, London City Council has made historic and unprecedented investments, $70 million in our multi-year budget for homelessness and housing supports. We've spent $250,000 per month to house at-risk men and women in hotels during the pandemic. 141 of these individuals have since been housed permanently, while an additional 235 individuals who were sleeping unsheltered or staying in shelter have been housed permanently through our various programs. More than 80 people have been moved out of the cold and into our temporary emergency winter shelters. And after years of advocacy, the province and Health Minister Christine Elliott gave final approval last year for an expanded, permanent, safe drug consumption site on York Street. These are but a few examples of progress, yet our progress must be crystallized into conviction. The curve has yet to be flattened, except that is in one area. I'm exceptionally proud to announce today that London, Ontario, is the first city in all of Canada to achieve functional zero when it comes to veterans' homelessness. Not the first city in southwestern Ontario, not Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, or Calgary. London, Ontario is the first city in Canada to achieve functional zero for veterans' homelessness. And what does functional zero mean? A community has achieved functional zero when the number of individuals experiencing homelessness is less than the number a community has proven it can house in a month. If someone becomes homeless, it is rare, brief, and non-recurring. That's functional zero. And that is what London has achieved when it comes to veterans' homelessness. It's truly a remarkable achievement, one that should instill in us pride and confidence and a motivation to aim higher, to think bigger, and to challenge ourselves to do even more. So instead of stopping at functional zero for veterans' homelessness, why not functional zero for homeless women or mothers with children fleeing abuse? Why not functional zero for our homeless Indigenous population or those with addictions or those cut off from family and related supports? Why not functional zero for chronic homelessness, period? And why not in London, Ontario? Perhaps the most pressing question is, what would it take? According to our Housing Stability Action Plan, London needs to generate 3,000 new affordable housing units to our existing stock. Right now, we average about 150 new units a year. And if that remains in place, it would take us 20 years to achieve. Well, that's unacceptable. So what if we cut that in half? Instead of 20, we did it in 10 years. What if we did it even faster? Having discussed this with our building and development community, our city staff, our provincial and federal governments, and to so many of our colleagues, here is my challenge. Let's achieve this in 5 years. That's our mission, to provide 3,000 additional housing units that are affordable over the next 5 years, thus achieving functional zero for those who are chronically homeless. It's ambitious. It requires us to quadruple the number of affordable housing units that are currently being provided annually. But we can do this, and I believe the time to start is now. The opportunity is right in front of us. We can rise and must rise to this occasion. We have partners at the federal and provincial levels of government who understand the need. We have a city council who gets it and has made historic investments in support of London's most vulnerable. We have innovative, action-oriented staff. And we have not-for-profits and social agencies standing shoulder to shoulder, collaborating in ways like never before. We need something else. We need you. We need the private sector. We need you as builders, as developers, as Londoners who have grown with this city. You make investments in building and property. We need you to make additional investments in people and community, whether it's providing labor, property, funding, partnerships. Join us. And not just the builders and developers in London. What if our entire business community accepts the challenge and finds constructive ways that they can support our most vulnerable? And I challenge us as well. I challenge our senior levels of government. I challenge our senior leadership at City Hall. I challenge my colleagues on City Council. And most of all, I challenge myself. What can I do? What can we do to speed this process along? How can we better incentivize our partners? How can we better prioritize the needs at the local level? And what must we do differently? Beyond the overriding moral imperative, this is not charity. This is an economic driver. Homelessness, poverty, mental illness, addiction. These are not only the greatest inhibitors to a fulfilling human existence. Collectively, they represent the greatest inhibitors of London's economic growth and future prosperity. Think of the economic spin-offs which result from stable housing. If people have affordable places to live, our workforce expands dramatically. If we're building 3,000 affordable units over the next 5 years, think of the benefits for our construction and trade sectors and the thousands of jobs it creates over many years, continuing London's role as the leader in job recovery and growth and humanity. Now imagine a downtown, vibrant, exciting, and once again the heart of our city. Similar to COVID, when it comes to London's most vulnerable, we are all in this together. Just as London was the first city in Canada to achieve functional zero for homeless veterans, let's do the same for chronic homelessness and flatten the curve of poverty and misery experienced by too many. Let's all resolve to flatten the curves associated with two more public health crises. I'll start first with climate change. You'll remember last year during this address, I announced a goal to fully electrify the LTC's fleet as part of a move away from diesel buses. As with many things, progress was slowed as a result of the pandemic, but progress has not been stalled. Several weeks ago, the LTC voted unanimously in favor of developing an implementation plan to be returned no later than June. In the meantime, while the work is ongoing, the LTC will also work with Civic Administration and London Hydro as they pursue all available funding opportunities for electrifying our fleet. There's no reason why they cannot begin to have this happen by this time next year. This is no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Let us not be the last ones on the bus. The charge towards electrification is happening across Ontario and around the world, both in the public and private sectors. Electric buses are already being ordered and on the streets in numerous cities across Canada. Just last week, the federal government announced billions of dollars to help support the electrification of public transit. We are fortunate to have MP Peter Fragiskatos advocating tirelessly on behalf of our city in support of enhanced transportation. Local greenhouse gas emissions from LTC buses represent as much as 40% of total emissions, either controlled by or directly influenced by the City of London. This is one of the single most impactful things we can do as a city if we're to achieve our goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, or possibly sooner. Beyond public transit, we're also in a unique position to improve transit between regions across southwestern Ontario, while also increasing London's connectivity to the GTA. I had the honor a few weeks ago of being asked by Transportation Minister Caroline Mulroney to chair the Southwestern Ontario Transportation Task Force. This group includes representation from Southwestern Ontario mayors and Indigenous communities, with a mandate to augment connections between rail and bus and road and air and local transit services across the region. What a huge opportunity this can be for us. So I ask you, work with me. Work with me on how people get around their communities, including accessible transportation. how they travel to and from work, how they travel across Ontario. All of these are absolutely essential components of building a strong post-COVID economy. In my role as chair, I will advocate in the strongest possible terms for more frequent, more reliable, and faster rail service to and from Toronto. Our Via Rail terminal in London, you may not know, but it is the fourth busiest in all of Canada. I've met personally with the senior leadership at Via, and they acknowledge the importance of London in their planning. Aside from increasing economic productivity and opportunities, the kinds of enhancements I'm advocating will have significantly positive impacts in supporting business and people while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Meanwhile, here at home, progress continues on other fronts. We begin construction in the coming months on the first elements of our rapid transit infrastructure, including the downtown loop, the Adelaide Street underpass, while work will continue on Old East Village streetscape improvements and the Dundas Place Thames Valley Parkway connection to Rideout. The LTC has also developed plans to increase services in all areas, which include Innovation Industrial Park that will begin later this year. A green bin program approved by this council will launch citywide next year, while multi-million-dollar investments continue to be made in other green infrastructure projects, including pathways for cycling, walking, scooters, e-bikes, wheelchairs. As we work to address this environmental public health crisis, we must also continue to work on eradicating a public health crisis of a different sort. One that diminishes our shared dignity as Londoners and as fellow human beings. We know systemic racism exists in London. City Council passed a unanimous resolution acknowledging this, while our local health board deemed it a public health crisis. That's not a simple opinion. That's a reality. Whether it's better or worse in our city compared to elsewhere is frankly irrelevant. What is relevant is that it happens, and that it happens on a regular basis in ways both overt and subtle. Let me say clearly, Black lives matter. Indigenous lives matter. People of color, your lives matter. We as the City of London are committed to listening, to learning, and we are committed to acting. The mandate of our Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee was recently amended to include anti-racism and diversity, including anti-oppression as a strategic initiative. As well, we unanimously approved the creation of an anti-racism and anti-oppression unit at City Hall. This unit will include a Black liaison officer, Indigenous relations officer, accessibility specialist, and workplace diversity and inclusion specialist. You know, our London Police is one of the leanest public services in Ontario across almost every metric, and has the second lowest number of police officers and staff per 100,000 population in the whole country. While I absolutely do not support any call to defund our police, the London Police Services Board has deferred the number of new police hires to just 5 instead of 20. We appreciate the support from our police, and the funds saved as a result have been reallocated to cover the cost of housing allowances for those in need. That's approximately 78 households for an entire year. The police services travel budget, in addition, has been rededicated to anti-racism training, while additional funds have been repurposed to create a dedicated crisis outreach and support team. This involves specialized officers being paired with outreach workers from the CMHA of Elgin Middlesex with the goal of delivering more appropriate responses to mental health crises. These actions are in addition to significant changes being implemented by the public and Catholic school boards, by Western and Fanshawe. All of these are public institutions. And when I think of corporate London, the need for change is just as great. To what extent has diversity been fully embraced, especially in senior and middle management? While this type of change takes time, it also takes commitment. I'm confident, though, that commitment is strong, and I'm confident it will be reflected. I can think of few other issues during my years in public life which have resulted in this amount of change in such a relatively short period of time. Those changes will continue. And while we may not always agree on the path, how we get there, we must always be in absolute agreement on our destination. A community that does not tolerate hatred or bigotry, racism, discrimination. We are all in this together. In closing, that really gets to the overall theme of this address. While we're talking about jobs, transportation, or London's most vulnerable, all of these things have been affected and influenced by COVID-19 over the past year. There has never been an issue that has so defined our personal and professional lives in all facets than this pandemic. These have been 382 days of progress and sacrifice. And yes, we are all in this together. We all want to get back to the way things were. Well, so do I. At the same time, we cannot be seduced by promises of a return to the way things were, not when such a return prevents us from advancing our city to where it ought to be, to where it must be. Given where we've been and where we are and where we're going, I'd like to leave you with this. It was our 7th Prime Minister, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who said, "Let them look to the past, but let them also look to the future. Let them look to the land of their ancestors, but let them also look to the land of their children." Back to the way things used to be, I'd rather we look to where things are going. And where we're going is proudly, enthusiastically, and confidently towards a more prosperous, economically exciting, equitable, and compassionate London. While tired, anxious, and weary, I believe, above all else, the state of our city is hopeful. And so long as hope, credible hope, remains, the state of the city is strong. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to serve.